After weeks of speculation, it's been reported this Wednesday that Derek Carr will remain the starting quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. Let's talk about that right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Houdat Nation? Welcome inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Rosvoglu, and as always, the Straight Up Saints podcast is brought to you by Scott McNair Injury Lawyers. You've been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, hurt offshore. Scott McNair handles it all. Give him a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. The Saints announcing today at the NFL Combine, I guess nonchalantly, but when you do it nonchalantly, it's still going to become major news anyway. Derek Carr remaining QB1 for the Saints, and obviously us Saints fans are going to have an awful lot to say about this. And as always, guys, I want to remind you, if you're listening live, make sure to A, like the video. It greatly helps out the channel. And B, leave your comments and thoughts in the chat, and I'll make sure to get through them as we go through it today. I'll maybe do a little bit of a different setup for today. Maybe I'll pull up your comments periodically as we go through this and get through this business involving Derek Carr. As I see Jerry saying that it is the worst day of his life. Obviously not realistically, no, but I get the sentiment. So let's jump into Derek Carr remaining the Saints quarterback for the 2025 season after about a month and a half of speculation as to whether or not they would cut him, whether or not they'd make him a post-June 1st designation, all that stuff, just for the Saints to pretty much come out today and announce that they're keeping him. And Mickey Loomis, when asked about Derek Carr and their decision, said, in quotes, "I think we feel like we've got a guy we can win with." Look, all I'll say about Derek Carr is he's a very middling quarterback. You're not really going to have a high ceiling with him. That's why he's never won a playoff game. That's why the Saints haven't been to the playoffs with him, because their roster isn't built for a guy like Derek Carr. Derek Carr, I think, needs to be on a ready, set team where he needs to be kind of a role player as opposed to elevating, because he's not going to elevate this cast in New Orleans. That said, and I mentioned this on Twitter earlier today, and I truly do feel this way about the Derek Carr situation. GMs can't outright say we're keeping a guy because of financial reasons and because it just makes life easier to be cap compliant. But if the reason the Saints are keeping Derek Carr is because it does make life easier for them to be cap compliant this year, I can live with it. I genuinely can live with it, because there is a world where the Saints, who are right now projected $47 million over the salary cap, can save about $31 million in cap space just by restructuring Derek Carr's contract. So if you're trying to sell me that, hey, by doing this, by keeping Derek Carr, by restructuring his contract, we're going to be cap compliant in a way more manageable situation, as opposed to making him post-June 1st and not getting any cap relief till that time, and you still have to make sure you're compliant. It's just too much of chaos for this team. I'd understand it. You can sell me that. What I won't be sold, and what I refuse to accept, though, is this idea that Derek Carr is just magically going to fix the Saints, because he hasn't. He didn't fix them when he came to them, and their schedule was a joke, and their roster was aging, but Demario Davis was better. Cam Jordan 2 years ago was better. A lot of these players who now are starting to hit that downslope, they were playing some pretty good football, so you can't sell me that. I also do believe that you can't sell me that Derek Carr, after a couple good games, let's say, if he were to have a good start with Kellen Moore, will be able to win over the fans, because he started off the 2024 season great. And the same thing happened again, right? Fan base, Derek Carr, tension between the two. So you can't sell me on that. Now, I am a little, from a fan aspect, from wanting something fresh and new, it is a little frustrating, right? It is a little, redundant to feel like you go into another year with Derek Carr as the starter. So I can understand those complaints, and I can understand those concerns. All I want to say right now about this move, though, for anyone who's really frustrated and feeling like the Saints are once again trapped in this kind of no man's land of not being good enough to actually compete and not being bad enough to pick in the top three, getting this move in order and keeping Derek Carr doesn't mean the Saints can't make another quarterback move this year. If Kellen Moore likes a quarterback at some point, let's say, and I'm not saying this is going to be the name, right? But if Kellen Moore, let's say, liked a Jalen Milroe from Alabama, and I'm just throwing a name out there just for the sake of throwing a name out there, okay? If he were to like that quarterback, he could still go get him in the second round. And that's the type of quarterback that I think needs to sit a year regardless. So you can play Derek Carr. Easier to be under the books this year, make sure everything's compliant, and still get a guy to run, Kellen Moore's system after next season, because this will be the final year of the Derek Carr run in New Orleans, thankfully. And that's just kind of the case. So Kellen's still going to get his chance. to have his quarterback, his pick, whether or not it comes this year, whether it's next year, he will have his say. I do believe that the Saints are big believers in not wanting to tear things down. And by keeping Derek Carr, I think they're avoiding the disaster mode of maybe winning just 2-3 games. And to some fans, that might be what you want, right? You might want the Saints to go full teardown mode. They don't believe in that. They've made that very clear that they don't believe in that. And keeping Derek Carr, in my opinion, is further proof that they don't believe in that. And Mike Tripwood even said today, said after talking with Mickey Loomis, Kellen Moore, and Jeff Ireland in Indy, it seems clear that the Saints aren't planning on a reset. They'll continue to stay budget conscious like recent years, but Loomis said he expects them to be more active in free agency than they were last year. So Saints don't want to hit the reset button. They don't want to approach the rebuild word. They want to continue to try and compete on the fly. Easier said than done. Tampa Bay's done it the last couple years. Granted, you hit a ceiling, right? Because your team's not just good enough, whether it's quarterback, coach, whatever it may be. The Bucs have kind of capped off at that, making the first round of the playoffs, and that's kind of it for now. For the Saints, though, if you're going to keep Derek Carr, and I feel very adamant about this, you better make some other decisions on these veterans. Because if your plan is to bring back Derek Carr and bring back a bunch of veterans that are aging and declining worse than Derek Carr, then it's very frustrating because I really just don't see how this is going to work. All right. And forget about the veterans that aren't good enough, right? Like I think Colin Saunders, I think that Jamal Williams, guys like that, you're going to outright cut them. They get you a little bit of cap relief. And frankly, they're just not good. Those were free agency acquisitions that just didn't work for New Orleans. And it's a shame. But you could just kind of say goodbye to them. I think guys like, Carl Granderson, Cesar Ruiz, whether people like it or not, those are restructures. Those are guys that you move because you're going to probably keep past this year anyway, and you're just going to manipulate that number so you can be cap compliant. So I'm okay with that. But you got to figure out what the hell you're going to do with Demario Davis. You got to figure out what you're going to do with Cam Jordan. You got to figure out what you're going to do with Taysom Hill. You got to figure out what you're going to do with Tyrann Mathieu. Because I'm sorry, if the Saints' plan is to just run all this back, those four guys come back, Derek Carr come back, what the hell is the plan? Because to think that you can actually compete with that is laughable. You couldn't compete with it this year. Now they're going to be a year older, a step slower. Don't understand how that's going to equate to winning football. So if you're going to keep Derek Carr, and the Saints have announced that they're going to, you're going to have to make tough decisions on these vets. And I know it's not easy. And the fan aspect of it, right? You want to see DeMario play with the Saints. You want to see Cam stick out with the Saints for his entire year. You want to see Taysom Hill play football for the Saints again. All understandably so. And it does seem like Taysom Hill is going to come back this year, at least from the latest reports. It seems like the tune on him has kind of shifted a bit. But are they taking pay cuts? Because the current cap numbers that those guys are at is frankly egregious. And if those guys truly do love Saints football and they want to continue to play in New Orleans, fine. Find a way for those guys to play at a much more affordable number. Because this ain't it for New Orleans. Because I'm telling you guys, if this is the plan, it's going to be another 5-12 year, but no growth. And I think that's something that could get frustrating, right? I've accepted it. I already accepted it the minute that news came across my timeline today that Derek Carr is coming back. It is what it is. Go get playmakers in the draft. Make some, decent free agency moves that can excite teams. Whether it's in the interior of the D-line, maybe it's the O-line. Find those kind of minor tweaks that can maybe make a big difference in a new system with Kellen Moore running the offense and Brandon Staley running the defense. So you can still make some moves in that regard to excite the fan base. But if you're going to sell us Derek Carr, Tyrann Mathieu, Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Taysom Hill for another year, I just don't know. Everyone else in the NFC is getting better. Everyone else, it feels like, is getting younger. And the Saints just feel like they're okay with being the retirement home of the NFC. And I just don't understand it. And I know that they're not in a position where they just cut these guys. So I want to make that very clear. The Saints, because of all the restructures, it's not simple math like that. You can't just cut these guys and be okay. But you got to find a way to make some of these dudes take pay cuts. And if not, some of these guys have to be post-June 1st designation cuts because it's not worth keeping them at these numbers. It's not. And I think for New Orleans, I know they don't like making these type of tough decisions. I know that they like to be loyal to players and maybe loyal to a fault. That shit's got to end this offseason, though. Because you cannot do this again. You can't. The defense is going to be old and slow. The offense is going to rely on a playmaker who, unfortunately, as much as I love Taysom Hill, is going to be 35, coming off an extensive ACL surgery. What's left in the tank? I really don't know. I don't know what the answer is. And I'm one of the biggest Taysom Hill fans there is, and I have concerns. So we'll see what the Saints decide to do overall, but they got decisions to make. and it's going to be really interesting to see what they decide to do. Now, I did mention, free agency, Mickey Loomis saying they'll be, more aggressive. This is what he said about cap space, though. He said, it's tight. There's no secret to that. And Derek Carr has a big number, so they're hoping to be able to maneuver it. If the Saints make that move where it's $31 million freed up in cap space, that's going to be the number that's going to jump out to people when that happens. Derek Carr will have, I believe, a $69 million cap hit for 2026, which would be the final year of his contract. Saints obviously would cut him by then, but look, the dead money is going to be insane. Now, I think the one reassuring thing is we've seen the Broncos take on a ton of dead money when they cut Russell Wilson, but they drafted Bo Nix, and they were fine. We just saw the Jets decide they're going to move on from Rodgers. They're going to take on a bunch of dead money. We'll see what they end up doing. So it's not new territory for the Saints, but it would be a little bit, of a frustrating aspect to this, adding more on top of the problem when it comes to Derek Carr's contract. That said, look, guys, I'm going to get to all your comments in just a second. If you're all frustrated, I totally understand it. I think that when it comes to the Derek Carr era for the Saints, just hasn't worked. It's been frustrating. I think between the fan base and then the Carr, let's say even family, whether it's his brothers on Twitter and whatnot, there is that tension. There is that frustration that it doesn't feel like everyone's in unison. And I understand that. And don't get me wrong. I just last week was talking about how if Kellen Moore does like Spencer Rattler, I would like to see Rattler start for 17 games because it's either a sink or swim situation and he plays well, or he stinks and he can draft your quarterback next year. Doesn't seem like you're going that route. Doesn't mean the Saints can't draft a quarterback, but Derek Carr's going to start for a little bit more. And, I just don't know what to say. I feel like I've exhausted a lot of my energy towards this topic where, I just hope that now my attention shifts towards other things, because if the Saints really decide to run it back again, rather than to, continue to be smart with their money while resetting certain things, that'd be pretty damn frustrating. Don't fall into the same mistake again. There's a way you can help out Kellen Moore and make sure that he's not sinking in his first year without also fucking yourself over for those other years. So that's where I'm going to leave it for that. And I'll get into any comments that you guys have here on the Straight Up Saints podcast. So let's start off with Michael with the super chat. Thank you so much for the support. Michael Morgan says, why are the Saints running it back? We'll see if they're truly running it back. They're going to have those tough decisions to make on the other four players that I mentioned. So that's going to kind of tell us what they feel. As for Derek Carr, his contract's the easiest for them to manipulate to be cap compliant for 2025. They could give you any other reason as to why they're keeping him. No, I don't think it's because they think he's a good winner. The man hasn't won a playoff game in his career. No, I don't think they believe that he genuinely can win them a Super Bowl. Can't even get into the playoffs in the NFC South. So I don't think it's any of those reasons. I just think they know financially he makes it easier for them. So that's kind of where we're at. Easy37 says Saints stock just came crashing down again. Half-Life says let's run it back because it worked the past 2 years. He also says you see the hires and you're like, yes, we're getting young. And then this dropped today, and now I'm sad once again. Yeah, look, I get it, right? This is the offseason where us Saints fans get a little optimistic. The unknown of Kellen Moore and what he could possibly bring to the table. And who knows? He might end up being a bad coach for all we know. But, there is that excitement because Kellen Moore is coming off his best year as a coach. Eagles just won the damn Super Bowl. He called his ass off when it came to, the game planning for both the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl. So this is a tough one. And I see a lot of you guys, whether you're calling it a terrible move or feeling like, the Saints are once again stuck in hell. I understand the frustration. Margaret says, I think we should get rid of Loomis and Carr. Telvin says, he's not bad and he's not good. Very much mid. Yeah, I'm with you. Horrible move. What are the Saints thinking? Like I said before, guys, if it's anything other than, hey, this helps us be cap compliant for 2025, I don't want to hear the reasoning. I just don't. You can't sell me on anything else. And I am one of those people that when the Saints signed Derek Carr, I was genuinely excited about the move. I was like, man, Saints just went, won 9 games. Was it 9 games? No, it was 7 games, excuse me. Won 7 games the first year with Dennis Allen. I thought, all right, quarterback upgrade. Maybe you get to 10 wins, weak schedule, make the playoffs. And that didn't happen. And now after 2 seasons of him, I think we kind of seen the writing on the wall. We just know he's not that guy. Paper Chaser says, I hate it, but if we still draft well, we can win this week division. I don't disagree with that, and I think that's where a lot of people are going to have to put the eggs into a certain basket. I know you don't want to put it in one basket, and the Saints haven't exactly drafted well the last couple of years, and I think that's what probably scares me the most. But I look at this Saints team and there's not a lot of blue chip guys. That's been kind of my main complaint about this team. Like, who are those exciting players that are going to make you gravitate towards watching the Saints on a weekly basis? And forget about if you're a Saints fan. Obviously, if you're a Saints fan, you're going to watch this team. This is your passionate fan, club that you ride or die for. But if you're not a Saints fan, what would be the reason to watch the Saints? I don't think they really have one right now. Like, there are bad teams in this league that, whether it's for fantasy purposes or whether it's for just entertainment purposes, you want to watch them, right? Like, the Raiders stink, but if I'm a fantasy football player, owner, man, I want to watch Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is a damn good player. Okay. The Patriots, rough year. Drake May, promising quarterback though. I want to watch him play football. So what's the calling card for the Saints? What's going to make you excited? I don't know. But to Paper Chaser's point here, they got to draft well. And whether it is an edge rusher, whether it's a playmaker, maybe a running back, maybe a tight end, maybe a receiver. I know you guys have mentioned Ashton Genty. I know you guys have mentioned McMillan from Arizona. I know you guys have mentioned Tyler Warren from Penn State. So I don't know who it's going to be for the Saints, but they need to start adding guys that are going to make an immediate difference, because if you don't do that, then you do feel like you're in this kind of hellhole of old players, not much excitement for the future. At least give us fans some young players to be excited about. So even when shit does inevitably hit the fan at some point in 2025, you have some guys that you could rest your hat on and say, okay, they're going to be part of this team for future years to come. John says, still waiting for necessary restructure to make this officially official. I get that. Some people might be holding out hope for that too, but it's definitely going to happen. Loomis can't see the trees because of the forest. Look, I would agree with that for the most part if this wasn't the easiest move for them to be cap compliant. Doesn't mean I agree with the move, by the way. I want to make that very clear. I am in the camp of I did not want to see Derek Carr play another game for the Saints. I'm still in the camp of I don't want to see Derek Carr play another game for the Saints. I'm just not going to get my way, which it's fine. I'm not the one running the team. I know Moore's not going to just watch Carr throw checkdowns at AK's feet. He's scared to get hit. Well, look, I think Kellen Moore, especially after what we saw this past season, you'd imagine that they're going to get the run game going a little bit more. So, I think I don't want to say I'll take pressure off Carr. I don't even think it's about at that point. You just won't be as pass heavy of a team, and I think that's going to be important. So we'll see what they end up doing. Ricky says you got to go get T-Mac. Look, they need another weapon regardless, and I think that's a type of player that would excite Saints fans. So I'd be definitely okay with that if that's the route that they go. Pablo says if both Mickey and Kellen want to have Carr as the bridge quarterback, let them. Kellen's smart enough to know what he wants to do and not let Mickey walk all over him in order to keep Carr. Look, I can't speak about that. I don't genuinely know what the discussion was behind the scenes. Now, I do think Kellen Moore does have respect for Derek Carr. I do believe that Derek Carr, if he's into that role, can be a good bridge quarterback for the Saints. That to me, that's the type of bridge quarterback you want to have. I always think of a guy like Alex Smith and the bridge he was to Patrick Mahomes. And obviously, you're not going to get that again. Like, that's a rarity in this league. But Alex Smith was the perfect pro, comes to work, doesn't cause any distractions, just does his job. Now, I'm not saying Derek Carr causes distractions, but it is a little odd. Like, Alex Smith has never been at a spot when he was the bridge where it's like, oh, the fan base hates him. And this isn't even just me speaking for my personal thoughts or whatever, because like I said, I don't know Derek Carr personally. He might be a good dude. I genuinely have no freaking clue. But I know Saints fans don't like him, and it's a weird dynamic. And obviously, Mickey Loomis isn't going to make a decision based off how the fan base feels. That'd be a little stupid if you ask me. But, it's not often that the bridge quarterback's hated. Like, because the bridge quarterback usually, I don't want to use the word irrelevant, but it's like a Tyrod Taylor, right? Like, Tyrod Taylor, respected vet, comes in, does his job, knows he's not the face of the franchise, kind of moves on. Derek was brought in to elevate the Saints, and he hasn't elevated the Saints. And now it's just like, oh, he's the bridge. I don't know. I have a hard time believing that aspect of it, Halfway says, what I'm wondering, is it for cap or are they announcing that he's the starter? I think it's both. I think you're mostly doing this because of the cap, but I also think that he will be the starter, at least for the beginning of the season, Paul says Mickey Loomis has no choice but to keep Carr for cap reasons, but pay attention to the restructure. Yeah, that's going to be a big part of it, right? How much money are you kicking towards next year? That's going to be a big part of it, because this is his last year, If Carr gets hurt one time, I hope Kellen Moore keeps him on the bench. He might. I mean, who the hell knows? I don't know how the depth chart's going to shake out. We'll see how the depth chart shakes out. Again, I'm not saying the Saints will, but I'm also not going to rule out them drafting a quarterback if Kellen Moore likes one. Like, I don't know exactly what he's thinking at this moment when he looks at the draft class, when he looks at the quarterback room, and where his head's at for that. So we'll see what happens. Cherry says, after 2 weeks of good vibes, this Derek Carr news got me in a tantrum. Yeah, I mean, you're not the only one who probably feels that way, Jerry. And I think a lot of Saints fans today are pretty frustrated. And I think it goes back to something one of you guys just mentioned a couple minutes ago, right? Like, you felt a changing of the guard in New Orleans, and now you're like, okay, actually, I got to put that on hold because we're running this shit back one more time. And again, the moves they make after this are way more telling, in my opinion, than what the Saints do with Derek Carr. You know, because whether we like it or not, Derek Carr, all right, he's back for this year. He's not going to be on the team next year. Like, that's just a fact at this point. And you just look at the way the contract's set up. He's not staying another year. But what happens with Taysom? What happens with DeMario? What happens with Cam? What happens with Tyrann Mathieu? Like, these are guys that I can argue probably just shouldn't be on the Saints anymore. And it doesn't mean I don't love them as players and respect them as professionals. Like, they're all just outstanding. Those are the type of guys you want in your locker room. And to some degree, the Saints should want that leadership to stay for next season. I totally get that. But at a cost, right? Like, if guys do want to be here, but your best attribute is leadership, it's not anything you're contributing on the football field, there's got to be some middle ground. They can't be eating up your cap as much as they are right now. And I think that's kind of my frustration. Half-Life says, I just want something fresh, some hope. This ain't it. Pablo says, honestly, if Kellen can rebuild everything else, quarterback should be the least of our worries this year. He's leaving after this year regardless. And the next quarterback will take the helm. We'll have better playmakers. I do love that comment, Pablo, and I'm a big believer of that. That's why I've been saying, like, I don't want the Saints to take quarterback at 9. You can take one at 40. You can take one in the 3rd round. Just don't take one at 9 because I don't love the idea of the Saints passing up on a potential blue chip prospect. Like, the Saints need, whether it's Will Johnson at corner, whether it's Mason Graham at the D-line, whether it's McMillan at receiver, Tyler Warren at tight end, Ashton Genty at running back. Like, the Saints need a dude. They don't have a lot of dudes on this roster. They don't. I think Olave's a dude. I think Fuaga's one. I think Brian Brzez's one. I'm running out of guys after that, though. Like, Shaheed's probably a dude, but not like a blue chip player, So they're going to have to figure that part out. David Noah 985 says, my issue is it affects the cap from 2026 onward. It does. We're going to have to see in terms of how much of this they're kicking the can down the road. We're going to have to see that money aspect of it. Either way, shit's getting kicked down the road because if it's not Derek Carr's full restructure, it's Ruiz. If it's not Ruiz, it's Carl Granderson. So something's getting restructured. Japanese Hercules says, another year of mediocrity and us going 7-10. Thanks, Mickey. This team is going to send me to the loony bin. It does feel like another kind of 7-10 year is loading. I'll give you that for sure. I don't feel like this team's ceiling is going to be particularly high. We're wasting time with Carr. Jerry says, I want to win games. Xavier says, think this could negatively affect Olave here next year. I don't know. I'm sure that's something that'll come into play. I think his family members have been pretty open about how they feel. Look, the weird thing is there's times where the Derek Carr Olave connection works. I think the biggest issue, though, is Derek Carr, in my opinion, is not the type of quarterback that you want when it comes to throwing over the middle of the field. And Olave is not the type of receiver that you want catching contested passes over the middle of the field. And when you kind of put that marriage together, I just don't love it. So, look, will it affect Olave? I don't know. I think Olave's still got to come play his best football because it's going to be a contract year for him in terms of being eligible for an extension. So, I think that part he has to kind of brush to the side. Maybe it's not going to be easy, but he's going to have to put that aside and understand he's got to do what's best for him, which is produce. I do believe what's best for Olave, though, is if the Saints were to get a guy like a Tyler Warren. And again, this isn't me saying that should be the pick at 9, so I don't want that to get confused. But the Saints need what I kind of figure a space eater, a guy that's going to play well up the seams, a guy that's going to make that catch where, look, you're probably going to take a hard hit. But you know what? It's better that dude takes that hard hit than Chris Olave. So I think having that type of complementary piece, that can make life a little bit easier for Olave, outside of the Derek Carr factor. Because even with the Carr-Olave dynamic not being as cohesive as we'd like it to be, Olave still produces pretty well. David Nolan 985 says, I'd rather lose every game this year and reset the cap situation. It's not about Carr to me. It's they have to fix the cap before this organization improves greatly. Yep, that's why I'm going to look at all the moves they make this year and figure out what the hell they're going to do. Because if the plan is to kind of retool as opposed to reset, I don't know. Like, I think that's how you get stuck in no man's land forever. And I know the Bucs have had success with this kind of soft retool because they hit on Baker, they've hit on their OC hires, whether it was Dave Canales or whether it was Liam Cohen, but they're not a threat. And if that's what you're aspiring to be, if you're aspiring to be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers of what they've been the last 2 years, I mean, have some fucking shame and have some standards, because no knock on the Bucs. The Bucs obviously are a class above the Saints, maybe 2 classes at the moment, but you don't aspire to be a 9 to 10 win football team that when the dance starts, you know you got no shot of being homecoming king or prom king or whatever the fuck it is, because that's the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers can have another fun season next year, and I'm sorry, there's no way in hell that they're going to win the Super Bowl. And I just don't want the Saints to believe that is something to try and aspire to be. I just don't see it. C-Bama says, why would we keep Carr? Just put him on the bench since he has experience. Like I said, I think it's definitely a financial move for sure. David Noah 985 says Saints should trade Olave. His concussion history and need for extension isn't worth the risk/reward. I think it matters of what goes down, right? Like, is he, kind of fishing for that extension at the moment? Is that something that the Saints have been presented? Is his asking price a little bit too rich for their blood? If all that happens, then yeah, we could discuss. I still think Olave is a good player. I think that the best is yet to come for him as long as he's healthy. But I understand it. It's probably not the best business move to pay a wide receiver right now when the rest of your roster stinks. But look, the Saints are going to have to, I think I would like to see them let this year play out before they make a final decision on Olave. Whodat712 says, this is the right move. You can't restructure all the older guys just to get rid of one guy. Time to be financially responsible. No QBs taking this team anywhere anyway, so not a big deal. In the grand scheme of things, as long as they stay financially responsible, like you mentioned, I agree. It is a small price to pay for salvation, in my opinion. That's just how I view it. And again, this isn't me being pro keeping Derek Carr. I've said many times, I want this Derek Carr era to be over with. I want the Saints to start anew and give us fans something fresh, some hope. And obviously, keeping Derek Carr doesn't exactly do that at all in any capacity. But if they're going to be financially responsible, and we just got to swallow one more year of this thing and then move on to better things, then all right, so be it. The Woodcraft Factor says, definitely have a shot at Arch Manning. Look, I don't have sources on this, but I'm not convinced Arch Manning's definitely leaving next year. He might, but I could see him playing one more year. Archie's been so big on, his grandson having multiple years of development. And yeah, Arch played a couple of games this year when Quinn Ewers missed time, but it's not a full season. So if Arch has a full season and he played some good football, but there's inconsistencies, I wouldn't be surprised if he goes back for another year. So that's just kind of where it's at. David Noah 985 says, if I'm Carr, I would ask to be let go. I think it all comes down to, what his options are. If Derek Carr looks around and is like, hey, if I don't stay with the Saints, the 2 options for me are like the Titans and the Jets, then, do you want to relocate your family for that type of opportunity? Look, if you're Derek Carr and you found out, I'm just spitballing here, I don't believe this is going to happen. But let's say the Rams do trade Matthew Stafford and it came out that the Rams were like, oh, we wouldn't mind Derek Carr at a cheaper number to be our quarterback. Then yeah, I think that's something you consider, right? Rams are a contender. That would be a better fit for him. You get to play with Sean McVay as his coach. But if you're Derek Carr and your options are like the Titans or the Jets, I don't know. Do you want to leave, or do you probably just suck it up one more year in New Orleans? Your family gets a little stability in terms of having one more year being there, and kind of go from there. John says the whole winning a bad NFC South hasn't worked out for us the last 4 seasons. We haven't been able to do that. Yep, I totally agree. I mean, it's right there. It's right there for us to see with them coming up short. Brian says it's not the draft, it's the coaching, lack of player development. Yes and no. It could be that to some degree, like when guys like Zach Bond shine, it is development, right? It is coaching to not get the best out of that guy. But a lot of it also is just bad drafting. Like Isaiah Foskey can't see the field for a team that's not good at rushing the passer. And he's a pass rusher. Like that's just unexcusable. Looking at the whiffs that they've had at certain positions. Kendra Miller, I think he's talented, but the dude can't stay on the fucking field. So again, whether that's just bad luck or whatever, it's rough. It's not a good look for this franchise. So the Saints haven't had a lot of hits, and All I'm asking is for them to finally have a draft where it doesn't have to be 2017. You're not doing 2017 again. We probably won't see another draft like that for the next 20 years, but you got to at least give 2 to 3 good players to this organization to feel like you're building in the right direction. Now, I do agree with you. I do think player development is a factor in all this, but I just think the Saints also just haven't drafted well. Now, pair that with bad development, and now you got yourself an absolute disaster. Jamal says, I have to question Kellen Moore why he took this dummy mission. Like I said, guys, you don't get coaching offers that often in the NFL, and the league turns on you in a hurry. If he goes back to the Eagles and Saquon gets hurt or Hurts has a struggling year and the Eagles go, 10-7, maybe they still make the playoffs, but they don't look as dominant. Maybe his stock isn't that high. And even if Kellen flames out as a Saints head coach and he flames out in the next 3 years, all right, the dude will be like 39, 40 years old. A team will definitely hire him to be an offensive coordinator, and he'll probably get a chance and a runway kind of to rebuild his stock and be a head coach again. So I understand why he took this opportunity, and I don't think it's a mistake taking it. I think you take the chance here. John says we need 2 starting cornerbacks, a safety, linebacker, revamp the D-line. Then you need a left guard, tight end, running back, and probably another wide receiver with Olave with another concussion away from retirement. Then you got 2 fragile key players at quarterback and running back. How do they even compete? Well, it's kind of tough to answer that after you listed all that, John, because I do agree with you, right? Like, this team's got some serious needs. I think you got to start taking it one day at a time, one position at a time for this team. And, that's why I'm a big proponent on number 9's got to be a blue chip player. And luckily for the Saints, regardless of what position, it's going to be one of needs. So let's hope you address one position there. Maybe you can address one of those needs in free agency, whether it's adding an interior guy. Maybe I think he's going to be out of their price range. But let's say they splurged a little bit and they got like Mekhi Becton to come in, right? All right, you addressed guard. Let's say you got, let's say you got Will Johnson or Mason Graham in the first round. Okay, you addressed the defensive need. Yes, you got a lot of work to go. You got a lot of work to go to be good. But you're starting to assess certain things and start checking off certain boxes. Running back, not going to be an exciting pickup if this happens, but Kenneth Gainwell played in Philly, knows Kellen Moore's system. That's a nice role player to add if the Saints were to go that route. Wouldn't be expensive. All right, maybe you're addressing position, not in the grandest of ways, but you're addressing it. Wide receiver. I mentioned what if they go Will Johnson or Mason Graham? Well, what if they go McMillan? Now you got a wide receiver to throw into the mix. You feel a little bit better about that unit. So the Saints are going to be able to address certain needs. They're still going to have a million other needs. I can't, stress that enough, but they're going to have their chance and their opportunity for sure to be able, to start making this roster a little bit better than what it looks like right now. But right now it looks like an absolute mess. And, I'd be lying if I thought, if I said I liked it, Do you think Davante Adams comes to NOLA to play with Carr one last time, or will we not be able to afford him? I don't want that to happen, truthfully. And look, I love and respect Davante Adams. He's a Hall of Famer in my book. I think he's a great fucking player. But, I don't love the idea of the Saints committing money to Davante Adams. And even if it's a 1-year deal, you're adding void years to that. You're spreading that cap hit. I'd rather you spread that cap hit around for a player who's probably going to be part of the process for the next couple of years. And Davante Adams is a great mercenary for hire for a team that might be competing. So to kind of make put this long answer into a short form, I probably go no. I would not like to see the Saints go after Davante Adams. I think he'd be a little too expensive. I don't think he'd help them long term. And I don't think Derek Carr is kind of at that point anymore in his career where Davante's like, okay, I want to go play with Derek Carr. Like, this is a 1-year situation. So I'd probably say it doesn't happen, and I don't think they'll go down. Jamal says, Hook says Carr isn't here in 2026. I read if they restructure again, his dead money increases to $60 million in 2026. It does. I still believe he'll be gone by 2026. I don't know if I'll have to make some like stupid bet where I eat something terrible on a live stream, or I don't know, punish myself by watching Morbius on loop 50 fucking times. I don't know what the punishment would be, but I feel very strongly about him not being on the roster in 2026. But again, pay attention to the restructure. How much money are they pushing into that year? It's going to be something to pay attention to. There's no doubt about it. And I think that's going to be really important, Margaret says Olave is 1 concussion away from retirement. I hope not. But obviously, like I said before, I think he's a good football player. I just hope he stays healthy. Joshua says, when do we start looking at Gail Benson when the GM consistently mismanages the team and the owner does nothing People need to start calling her out. I don't know. I don't. I think that might be a little too far. Like I said, guys, I don't love another year of Derek Carr, but I understand why they're doing it. Like this isn't an irrational move that they're making. It's just a move we don't like, and maybe people don't want to hear that because everyone's kind of got Derek Carr fatigue, and I 1,000% get it. I have Derek Carr fatigue at this point, but it's not like the type of move the Saints made today where I'm like, holy shit, like, I can't be a fan of them. I don't want to support them. Like, no, still love this team dearly, still will support them. But when the Saints restructured Derek Carr last year, they kind of set themselves up in this spot. Now, you want to say that was the mismanagement? I'm going to agree with you. Like, I'll agree with you wholeheartedly. But this move today wasn't the move that makes me say, what the fuck are they doing? If they start restructuring every old player's contract and they start pushing the can down the road just to build cap money for this year so they can be spenders in free agency, then I'm probably going to get really annoyed. And I'll probably go on a rant that I usually don't go on unless the Saints lose 7 games in a row. Shout out Dennis Allen. But for now, it's just going to be a move that I don't like, but I understand why they made it. Again, not a fan of the move, but I understand there's rationale behind it, and it is what it is, Paul says Saints need to restructure Carr's contract where they can move on from after next season. Totally agree with that. Anthony says, don't go to the game. Stay at home. Do not buy them tickets. Anthony says, man, shut up. You don't know shit about no New Orleans Saints. They ain't going to do shit but have another losing season. Yes. I mean, I agree with them having another losing season. I've said that at the start, but yeah, I mean, I don't know what else I could add to that. This is not a good roster. They're aging. They don't have a lot of young players that you feel like are kind of top of the line, 25 and under stars, right? A lot of teams can say they have those. The Saints, unfortunately, don't really have that stockpiled at all right now on the roster. So not a lot of optimism. Totally understand that. I think the hope is that the Saints are responsible financially this year. So next year, there's a world where they got $60 million, $65 million to spend in free agency, which, by the way, they can have if they play their cards right. They play their cards right, this is what they can have. But, you got to do the right thing and make sure you put yourself in a good spot. So we'll see where the Saints go. Navarre OTR says, this is what poverty looks like, huh? I would probably say so. I'd probably say this is I guess this is what poverty's kind of become for some people in terms of like the word. I don't know if that's what people use for it. This is, in my opinion, is just no man's land. It's like the equivalent of those Chicago Bulls teams from the last 4 or 5 years where it's like, all right, you had like Zach LaVine, you had Vucevic, you had some like big name players who are solid, but you looked at the roster, like you're not good enough to even make the playoffs. You're not good enough to do anything if you made it into the playoffs. So what the fuck is the point? And you're still spending a lot of money. That to me is where they're at. So if that's purgatory, then I agree 1,000%, or poverty, whatever it might be for you guys. But it's a rough spot. Not a lot of optimism at the moment. The hope, again, comes down to drafting and coaching. If the Saints draft well, you give your coach more options. If your coach ends up producing this year, we'll all feel better about this team. And the vibe will change. But you're just not going to have that huge cultural shift like, let's say the Commanders just had, because you don't have that quarterback yet. It's still playing Derek Carr. Hopefully you get to that point. But right now it's going to come down to drafting well and then making sure that you have the right coach in place. And the Saints are going to have to get answers on that. So I'll return in just a short break, guys, but I want to get a quick word from DraftKings Sportsbook.
This ain't the little itty-bitty teeny-tiny bowl. This is Super Bowl 59. Get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of Super Bowl 59. Scoring touchdowns is key to hoisting the Vince Lombardi Trophy, and you have a shot to score big by betting on them at DraftKings Sportsbook, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. New DraftKings customers can bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code BOOT. That's code BOOT, B-O-O-T, for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, 21 and over. Age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in New Hampshire, Oregon, and Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/ftball. NFL Plus premium offer available only to new and former NFL Plus subscribers. Additional NFL Plus premium terms at nfl.com/terms.
Once again, thank you to DraftKings Sportsbook for being part of the program. I greatly appreciate it. So, like I mentioned, Saints are rolling with Derek Carr. I think it's that type of move that fans aren't going to agree with, and I understand why. I think we're all kind of fatigued at this point with the current roster makeup, who's at quarterback, the aging veterans on this roster. I totally get all of this. Now, Derek Carr does not stop this team from drafting a quarterback. They can still draft one if Kellen Moore finds his guy, and maybe you could develop him, and he can be, Carr can serve as the bridge for now to whatever that thing might be next. But again, no certainties. It's going to help them in terms of getting cap compliant for 2025. I totally understand that. And I get that's why it happened. For me, like I said, it's not the type of move that I think is worth people saying, boycott the team, not watching this and that. I don't see it that way. I just think it's a move that I just don't like. And that's just where it's at. But I'll finish off with this because I do believe that this is more important than the Derek Carr thing. I think what Saints fans should be focusing on is how this front office, particularly Mickey Loomis, how he handles free agency, how he handles the other veterans on this roster. And I mentioned it at the start of the show, and I'll mention it again. All right. You're keeping Derek Carr because you can clear up to $31 million in cap space when you're $47 million over the cap. All right, fine. Don't have to agree with the move, but there is some logic to it that you go, okay, it's a financial decision. It is what it is. But do not start kicking the can down the road for players who clearly have fallen off a cliff. And there's a lot of veterans on this team that are declining. Do not do that. Do not decide that you got to be a player in free agency all of a sudden when you're so close to reaching kind of the light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to cap hell. I mean, there is a world where the Saints can be $60 million under the cap starting for next new league year and feeling like, hey, in 2026, we can be spenders. Kind of be patient. You've been patient for the last year and a half. Why blow it all now just because you have a new coaching staff? Again, understand why they brought Derek Carr back. Don't have to agree with it. But for the love of God, please do not make decisions in free agency and with certain restructures that you're going to pay the price next year when you can finally have a little bit of a spending spree and feel more open in free agency. So that's how I'm going to close this. That's my final rant to all you guys. I understand why everyone's frustrated about this Derek Carr thing. Lord knows I've been wanting them to make a change for this. But how do they approach the offseason? Are they viewing this as last year where you're kind of rebuilding, retooling on the fly? Or are they saying, to hell with this reset, we're going to be spenders? And if it's that option, man, I'm worried about the franchise. If it's not, keep it rolling. We just got to be patient and suck it up for one more year. So we'll see what happens. But as always, guys, I appreciate you for tuning in, leaving your comments, your thoughts, concerns. You guys are the very best. As this offseason continues to roll around, whether it's draft coverage, free agency, we'll have you covered here at Boot Media. So make sure you guys subscribe to the channel for more information. And as always, guys, stay tuned for more content from the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation.